It was the sound that echoed through every corridor of Windsor, a thud followed by silence. Guards froze. Attendants whispered. At the heart of the royal estate, Princess Anne had just done the unthinkable. With her arm outstretched and voice firm, she blocked Queen Camilla's path. The royal vault loomed behind her, sealed not by iron, but by legacy. What had just occurred would set the entire monarchy into silent turmoil. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It wasn't a scheduled visit. Camilla's arrival at Windsor had caught even the tightest circle off guard. Her request was simple in words but seismic in implication. She wanted access to the royal vault, a place few had entered, and even fewer had dared to question. Tucked beneath centuries of stone and protocol, the vault was more than a chamber of artifacts. It was the heartbeat of a lineage, a burial ground of truths too dangerous to surface. Within its sealed doors were Queen Elizabeth's most personal belongings, unpublished letters, heirlooms of power, and whispered secrets woven into brooches and diaries. Camilla's intent was unknown. Her tone, however, was unyielding. And then came Anne. Without escort, without announcement, she appeared in full military-style dress, her boots echoing like judgment down the hallway. There was no protocol here, no announcement, just presence. And presence, when carried by Princess Anne, was its own decree. Before a single aide could speak, she moved with quiet authority and took position in front of the vault. Camilla's footsteps halted mid-stride. Their eyes locked. The tension was instant, electric. Whispers rippled through the palace like aftershocks. The queen consort stood frozen not in fear, but disbelief. Anne did not shout. She didn't plead. There was no dramatic performance, only stillness, and an unmistakable shield of protection. Her body, her silence, her stance, it was all a message, one that rang louder than any royal proclamation. Not here, not you. Behind her, the great vault door remained sealed, massive, gilded and unmoved. But it wasn't just wood and iron that stood between Camilla and its contents. It was loyalty. It was blood. It was a vow made long before Elizabeth's final breath. And Anne was prepared to uphold it against anyone. Camilla's stunned expression betrayed her. For a split second, the years of political finesse, the cultivated grace, the rehearsed calm, all of it flickered. She wasn't facing a courtier or an assistant. She was facing the Queen's daughter. The room didn't need a single word to erupt in tension. Every royal aide, guard, and official in sight paused, caught in the gravity of a moment none dared interrupt. The monarchy had always depended on ceremony. But this was raw lineage in motion. And as Camilla slowly turned and walked away, her exit echoed louder than her arrival. Anne didn't move. She didn't speak. She simply remained, like a guardian of ghosts, stationed between the present and a past not yet ready to be disturbed. It was clear to all who saw it, this wasn't about one vault. It was about power. It was about memory. It was about who still carried the weight of the Queen's will. But what was inside that vault that made Anne risk royal warfare to keep Camilla out? To understand the gravity of that moment, we must go back to what was buried long before the Queen herself. The royal vault isn't just a storage room, it's the soul of the crown. Hidden beneath Windsor, it has guarded centuries of royal secrets, from bloodline truths to unfulfilled wishes of monarchs past. But for Anne, this vault held something more than heritage. It held her mother's final promise, and perhaps a silent warning. Deep within the foundations of Windsor lies a chamber that has long been spoken of in hushed tones, even among the highest echelons of the monarchy. Not because of its grandeur, but because of its gravity. The royal vault is where legacies are frozen in time. It holds more than crowns and jewels. It holds memory unfiltered, unedited, and untouchable. Generations of sovereigns have entrusted their most intimate truths to this place. Love letters never delivered, speeches never given, decrees never enacted. It is here that Queen Elizabeth II placed her most sacred possessions, items that no museum would ever catalogue. Among them, Queen Mary's emerald tiara, untouched since the 1942, known not for its beauty but for what it represented, a reign interrupted, a power withheld. And beside it, the Queen's personal diaries, wrapped in worn leather, their pages rumoured to bear the private reflections of the longest-serving monarch in British history. Yet the most guarded treasure was neither jewel nor parchment. It was the invisible authority passed down not through documents, but through discretion. In the Queen's final months, she had spoken only to Anne, in conversations no one else witnessed. There were no signatures, no formal decrees, but her message was unmistakable. Certain things must never be touched, especially by Camilla. This wasn't about bitterness, it was about preservation. The Queen knew the fragility of perception and the dangers of rewriting memory for convenience. Anne didn't inherit that task. She accepted it, as a daughter, as a soldier, and above all, as a protector of the Crown's true soul. Within the vault, a single object has become legend among palace insiders: the black box. No one has seen it, no one knows its exact contents, but whispers say it contains confidential files regarding the transition of power from Elizabeth to Charles. Notes, transcripts, and perhaps most damning letters between the Queen and senior advisors, expressing private reservations about Camilla's public role. Its existence is unconfirmed. Its influence, undeniable. And it is this mystery that fuels the fire. Not everyone agreed with Anne's blockade. In the drawing rooms of Sandringham and Balmoral, quiet debates turned sharp. Some argued that tradition demanded the Queen Consort have full access, that the vault was no longer private, but national. Others, especially those closest to Elizabeth, insisted Anne was right. That the vault wasn't just a room, it was a final boundary between what the Queen chose to reveal and what she refused to surrender. Lines were drawn, allegiances tested, and as the royal family fractured beneath the weight of this silent war, one thing became clear: this wasn't just about a door being closed. It was about who held the keys to the kingdom's soul. But Anne's blockade wasn't just about protecting the past, it was a warning about the future. And Camilla wasn't going to take that lying down. Camilla stormed out of Windsor that evening, but not in silence. She made calls, she summoned allies. And when she returned to Clarence House, she did something unprecedented. She demanded a council vote on vault access. What began as a silent standoff was about to become a royal war. Behind the palace gates, fury simmered. Camilla was not humiliated by the denial itself, but by the silence that followed. Anne's refusal had unfolded in front of palace aides, advisors, and staff loyal to the memory of the late Queen, and Camilla knew full well that silence, in the monarchy, is often louder than scandal. She hadn't merely been denied a door, she had been denied stature in the most sacred of royal spaces. Within hours of returning to Clarence House, she had phoned Charles firm in tone, rehearsed in emotion, and then rang William, though his answers were measured, almost cautious. Her next step was calculated. She reached out to trusted aides, long-time loyalists who owed more to her than to the crown, and began laying the groundwork for something the royal family rarely did in public: force a decision. It was a move that stunned even seasoned palace observers. A Queen Consort demanding a vote on something so historically protected, so symbolically fraught. But Camilla wasn't chasing permission anymore, she was chasing control. The proposal, a formal review of Anne's authority over the royal vault, disguised under the language of clarifying custodianship for the preservation of institutional legacy. But everyone understood the subtext. This wasn't about preservation, it was about power. And it sent shockwaves through the already tense royal household. Charles, caught between two forces that defined his reign, his wife and his sister, was paralyzed. To side with Camilla would be to trample the final wishes of his mother. To side with Anne would risk rupturing the fragile balance he had spent years repairing after his coronation. The inner circle cracked. Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, quietly aligned with Anne, her loyalty firm and unwavering. Prince Edward, meanwhile, chose silence, refusing to engage in what he privately called a battle not meant for public hands. And William? William said nothing. He watched, he listened, and his silence became the most powerful move of all. For Camilla, this silence stung more than open defiance. She needed his voice, and he had given her nothing. In response, Camilla authorized a carefully worded statement to be issued through unofficial channels. A call for unity, transparency, and shared stewardship of the monarchy's historical memory. But the phrasing was sharp, and between the lines was a pointed accusation that Anne had overstepped, that she was guarding more than memory, that she was gatekeeping power. Anne offered no rebuttal, no press response, no counter-message. She remained exactly where she had been, unmoved, unwavering, and silent. And in that silence, she won another kind of authority. Public speculation spiraled. Was Camilla trying to rewrite history? Had the Queen truly entrusted Anne with secrets not meant for the throne? Or was there something darker behind Camilla's desperation? But the deeper threat wasn't Camilla's retaliation. It was what she hoped to uncover in that vault, and what Anne had already hidden. In a drawer lined with royal blue velvet, beneath a stack of the Queen's handwritten letters, lay one envelope unopened, unaddressed, but unmistakably marked with a gold insignia. Its existence had never been acknowledged publicly, but Anne had read it, and its contents would make Camilla's access a betrayal of the Queen's own words. In the quiet days following Queen Elizabeth's funeral, when public grief began to fade and the palace resumed its stiff rituals, a second, more personal mourning unfolded behind locked doors. The Queen had left behind not just memories, but messages. Dozens of handwritten letters, some formal, others intimate, delivered discreetly to the family members closest to her. Each letter carried the weight of finality, a closing chapter between the monarch and those who had lived in her shadow. Most of these letters were distributed as expected, following the solemn instructions of her private secretary. But one letter never left Windsor. It remained sealed in the Queen's private drawer. Not hidden, not forgotten, but protected. Its presence known only to Anne and the trusted aide who discovered it. And from the moment Anne broke its seal, she knew why it had to remain secret. The contents of the letter were not commands, they were confessions, reflections scribbled in fading ink by a monarch preparing to relinquish everything but the truth. Elizabeth expressed concern not about policy or politics, but about balance, what would remain steady after she was gone, and what might fall. There was an unspoken fear threaded through her words, that with her death, the crown would shift into hands that did not understand its weight. The language was careful, deliberate, but between the lines was something unmistakable. Camilla was not to inherit everything, not the legacy, not the symbols, not the private things. There were specific mentions of heirlooms, of diaries, of letters meant for no one but Elizabeth's blood. And, most strikingly, there was mention of Catherine. Quiet, poised, and fiercely loyal, Catherine had become more than a daughter-in-law in the Queen's eyes. She had become the anchor, and it was to her, not Camilla, that Elizabeth wished certain pieces be entrusted. This letter became Anne's silent burden, a truth too dangerous to expose but too sacred to ignore. It confirmed what Anne had already sensed in her mother's final months, that behind the handshakes and formal acceptance of Camilla's title, the Queen still harboured doubts about image, about timing, about history being rewritten too soon. A place where her mother's intentions, unspoken but deeply felt, could still breathe. Every time Anne passed through Windsor, she checked that drawer, not out of paranoia, but out of duty. That letter was not just a message. It was a line in the sand, and it was hers to protect. Anne never spoke of it to Charles, never whispered a word to William. She knew the ripple it would cause. She understood that even the suggestion of favoritism could tear open wounds that had only just begun to heal. But in the face of Camilla's rising influence, that letter stood as her quiet weapon, not to attack, but to shield, not to expose, but to preserve. And that's why she stood before the vault, not as a challenge to Camilla's crown, but as the last defense of a mother's final, unspoken decree. But Camilla had her own reasons for reaching toward that vault, and they traced back to decades of bitterness and unfinished rivalry. Why was Camilla so desperate to enter the vault? Not for jewels, not for titles, but for control. Somewhere inside, she believed, lay the remnants of a narrative she had long fought to rewrite. And if even one document painted her in the Queen's disfavor, the cracks in her crown would shatter. For decades, Camilla had walked through the corridors of royalty as both an insider and an outsider. Her public redemption had been hard-won, earned not through acceptance, but through endurance. She had survived the scorn of headlines, the whispers of courtiers, and the silent distance of a queen who never truly embraced her. Elizabeth had shown her respect in public, but in private, the frost never fully thawed. Camilla was never granted the warmth of full belonging, and she knew it. That quiet awareness, always lingering beneath the surface, had followed her into every room, shadowed every crown she wore. And now, with the Queen gone, and a new era unfolding, that fear had taken root in the one place she couldn't control, the royal vault. Rumours plagued her thoughts like ghosts. Whispers that the Queen had written a final letter, not to Charles, but to Diana. A private note, unrecorded and unseen, stored in the vault with the rest of her sacred belongings. The mere suggestion sent a chill through Camilla's composure. If such a letter existed, and if it ever saw daylight, it could undo the entire arc of her public transformation. It wasn't paranoia, it was survival. A single page, a single sentence from the Queen, could reshape the public's memory. Camilla didn't want access for curiosity. She wanted to know what had been left behind. What version of herself had been locked away by a monarch who never truly forgave her? In the weeks following Anne's blockade, Camilla began holding private consultations, quiet, meticulous, almost surgical in their secrecy. Palace archivists were summoned, not with questions, but with veiled hypotheticals. Legal advisors were approached to review succession-related clauses tied to personal royal property. None of it was public, none of it official, but all of it pointed to one goal: find a crack in the foundation, a legal opening that would allow her to reclaim authority over the vault without facing Anne directly. Yet beneath that strategy was something more fragile, more human. It was the fear that she had spent years building a legacy on borrowed grace, and that legacy now stood on a fault line she couldn't see. This was not the fury of entitlement. It was the desperation of someone who had climbed to the summit only to realize the summit was still a glass ceiling. Camilla's power was conditional, respected, but not revered. Her crown was worn with caution. And if the Queen's final words were indeed buried within that vault, words that cast her in the shadow of Diana or Catherine, then Camilla's image wasn't just at risk. It was in danger of collapse. This was no longer about relics or records. It was about rewriting how history would remember her. She needed to enter the vault, not to take, but to erase what could destroy her. And in that pursuit, nothing, not even Anne, felt immovable anymore. As Camilla's anxiety rose, others in the palace began taking sides, and the most unexpected royal would make a move that changed everything. When Catherine, Princess of Wales, walked into the Windsor Council room that afternoon, no one expected her to speak, but what she said changed the room's temperature. Calmly, firmly, she aligned herself not with the Queen Consort, but with Princess Anne. And in that moment, the future of the monarchy silently shifted. The council chamber had been heavy with anticipation. Tension clung to every corner, the air thick with unspoken agendas and fractured loyalties. Senior members of the royal household sat in silence, waiting for Charles to lead, for Camilla to push forward, for Anne to remain immovable. But it was Catherine who broke the stillness. Her entrance was quiet, unannounced, yet undeniable. And without raising her voice, without demanding attention, she delivered the one sentence that silenced the entire room. "We must honor the Queen's personal wishes publicly and privately." That was all. No elaboration, no accusations. But the weight behind those words was unmistakable. She had drawn a line, and she had chosen a side. The shock was instant. For months, Catherine had remained above the fray, keeping her distance from royal politics and the vault controversy. Her silence had been interpreted as neutrality, but now, standing alone, she made it clear. Loyalty to the Queen did not expire with her death. Her statement wasn't just a defense of Anne, it was a challenge to Camilla's ascent. And what made it even more powerful was what she didn't say. She didn't mention the vault. She didn't invoke Anne's name. She didn't need to. The room understood. The message was for Charles, for the aides, for the institution itself. The Queen's legacy would not be rewritten without resistance. And behind her, William stood still, not defiant, not dismissive, just present. His silence was as deliberate as her voice. It told the room everything it needed to know. He wasn't going to step between the two most powerful women in his family. But he also wasn't going to stop Catherine. His quiet endorsement added fuel to a fire that had already begun to spread outside the palace walls. Within hours, the public had caught wind of the confrontation. Hashtags began to surface: number Team Anne, number Queen Catherine. Headlines shifted tone. Commentators who had once spoken cautiously of Camilla's role began questioning her intent. And for the first time, Anne's resistance wasn't framed as rebellion, but preservation. In the midst of the political storm, something subtle and unforgettable passed between Catherine and Anne. A brief exchange, a quiet nod, no words spoken, but it was enough to signal what insiders would later call a generational transfer, not of power, but of guardianship. The old guard recognizing the rise of the new not through titles, but through action. And as Catherine sat down, Camilla remained motionless. The Queen Consort, for all her battles and victories, felt something slipping. Not publicly, not visibly, but internally, undeniably. Her influence, long protected by protocol and proximity to the throne, was being peeled away not by force, but by presence. But Catherine's stand wouldn't be the final blow. That would come from the most unshakable force in the Windsor bloodline, Princess Anne herself. Princess Anne summoned no press. She made no speech. But inside the red drawing room, she delivered an ultimatum directly to the king. If Camilla entered the royal vault, Anne would resign from all royal duties. The crown had to choose between quiet dignity and performative entitlement. There were no witnesses, save for Sir Clive Alderton, the king's private secretary, who stood silently as a storm unfolded without volume. Anne didn't raise her voice. She didn't pace or plead. Her words were calm, measured, and deliberate, delivered not with anger, but with conviction carved from something deeper than tradition. She reminded Charles of the promise they had both made long ago to preserve the dignity of the monarchy, to protect its legacy not just in public but in private. And now, that promise was being tested. She spoke of their mother not in sentiment, but in duty. The vault, she said, was more than just a room. It was an inheritance of trust, one that had not been meant for spectacle, but for silence. Camilla's demand to breach it was, in Anne's words, not only a misstep but a violation. Charles sat still, caught in the chasm between blood and bond. He knew what Anne meant to the monarchy, her years of unwavering service, her global military ties, her ironclad credibility. To lose her, even quietly, would not be a tremor. It would be an earthquake. Her resignation would send ripples through the Commonwealth, the armed forces, and the very backbone of royal continuity. But deeper still was the unspoken truth between them, that Anne wasn't bluffing. She never made threats, only decisions, and this was hers. By nightfall, the palace machine had spun into motion. Advisors scrambled, measuring fallout scenarios, whispering about headlines, foreign relations, and ceremonial gaps. No one had expected the royal family's most silent pillar to take such a dramatic stand. But behind closed doors, they all knew Anne's influence, though rarely televised, was absolute. If she walked away, it would be seen not as protest, but as indictment. And Charles, for all his status as monarch, understood that his reign could not afford a fracture so raw, so personal, and so public. He said nothing to Anne that night. No decision, no promise. But by morning, the answer was written not in words but in steel. The vault remained locked. Guards were not instructed to move. The Queen Consort did not return. And a new silence fell over Windsor, not of tension, but of understanding. A line had been drawn, and for now, it had been honoured. Anne returned to her duties the next day as if nothing had happened, but everyone knew something had. The threat didn't need to be repeated. The monarchy had been forced to choose, and it had chosen its conscience, however temporarily. Camilla would not enter the vault, but she wasn't finished. And her next move would be darker, quieter, and far more dangerous. Denied access, Camilla turned inward, but behind the palace walls, she initiated something unseen, a slow replacement of key advisors, secret visits to Windsor archivists, and whispers of a secondary vault. Her goal wasn't just access, it was control of the royal memory. The silence that followed Charles's decision was deafening. Camilla did not protest. She didn't issue statements or make another attempt at entry. Instead, she shifted course, subtly, methodically, and with unnerving calm. What could not be claimed by authority, she would seek to influence by proximity. Within weeks, familiar faces began to disappear from her inner circle. Long-serving staff, many of whom had served under Queen Elizabeth, were quietly dismissed or reassigned. In their place came new figures, advisors loyal not to the crown, but to Camilla personally. People who owed her their presence, their positions, their futures. It was not a purge. It was a quiet restructuring, one that few outside the palace noticed, but those inside could not ignore. Simultaneously, a discreet operation began within the Royal Collection Trust and the Office of Palace Records. Individuals tied to Camilla's new advisory team started reaching out not directly, but through intermediaries. Questions were posed, hypotheticals introduced, inquiries framed as academic curiosity or archival tidying. What existed beyond the formal vault? Were there ever items recorded but never retrieved? Was it possible that an alternate archive, perhaps unofficial, had been created at one of the lesser-used estates? At first, these questions were brushed off, but their repetition and the tone in which they were asked revealed their intent. Camilla had stopped trying to breach the vault. She was now trying to build a new one, her own. Sandringham soon surfaced in whispers. A property long associated with the Queen's private retreats, it was rumoured to house overflow artefacts, items too personal or politically sensitive to be catalogued through official channels. No one could confirm its contents, or if such a holding area even existed, but that didn't stop Camilla's emissaries from probing. She wasn't just looking for what had been hidden, she was laying the groundwork for a counter-narrative. If she couldn't rewrite what was sealed, she would curate what was still within reach. The change in her demeanour became increasingly visible. Camilla, once warm in her calculated way, began to retreat emotionally. Her presence grew colder, her smiles more strained. The mask she had worn through decades of scrutiny started to harden into something less forgiving. She no longer sought public favour. She sought insulation, and in that insulation, the seeds of something darker took root. No longer concerned with immediate perception, she was now focused on something far more enduring, how history would shape her legacy when the final curtain fell. Control, not affection, had become the prize. Inside palace circles, concern grew. What began as a failed attempt to claim legacy was now evolving into something more complex, more dangerous. Camilla wasn't stepping down, she was digging in. Some began to ask what few dared to consider, was this simply a last effort to protect herself, or the first quiet move in a longer game, a deeper play for dominance over the monarchy's memory? But despite her maneuvers, the royal vault remained sealed, and one final revelation would cement why Princess Anne stood her ground all along. Inside the vault, beneath the coronation relics and diamond-studded legacies, was a single, worn diary, handwritten by Queen Elizabeth herself in the final months of her reign. What Anne read there changed her. It wasn't a command, It was a confession. And it's why the vault must never be open to those who did not earn the Queen's trust. Tucked away between the symbols of monarchy and the weight of history, it waited bound in aged leather, fragile at the spine, and entirely unmarked on the cover. No title, no royal crest, just silence. But within its pages was a voice Anne had known her entire life, quieter now, more reflective, stripped of ceremony and shield. The Queen had not written for history. She had written for truth. The diary chronicled not public milestones, but private reckonings, moments of doubt, of pain, of haunting clarity. Anne turned the pages slowly, as if bracing for something she already suspected. And it came. Elizabeth, in her own words, had begun to question the consequences of decisions made under pressure, decisions rooted in duty, but shadowed by regret. There were lines that trembled with sorrow. Subtle but undeniable references to Camilla's rise not out of animosity, but out of unease. The Queen had accepted her. Yes, but acceptance is not the same as belief. In the diary, Elizabeth admitted that public opinion had often dictated what the Crown allowed, even when her instincts warned otherwise. She wrote of Diana, not in sorrowful memory, but as an enduring presence she still felt bound to. She wrote of Catherine, whose steadiness and self-discipline reminded her of the woman she once wished she could be. And she wrote of Anne not with flattery, but with reverence. The one child, she confessed, who never sought the crown, but who understood it most. As the entries deepened, the tone shifted. There was reflection, then confession. Moments the Queen feared she had compromised legacy for peace. Lines of disappointment in the pace of change, in the burden of public image, and in the reality that the monarchy was becoming increasingly about optics rather than oath. But then came the final line, the one that hardened Anne's resolve, the one that made her rejection of Camilla irrevocable. Let legacy protect what blood cannot. It wasn't a plea. It was a verdict. A truth laid bare by a woman who had spent her life veiled in diplomacy. Anne closed the diary with hands that trembled only slightly. And in that moment, the battle wasn't about control. It was about protection. The vault no longer held just relics or whispers. It held a mother's truth, a sovereign's doubts. A family's fracture recorded not in decrees, but in pain. Anne promised herself, then this would remain untouched. She would not let performance replace memory. She would not let ambition overwrite reverence. And so the door stayed closed, not from spite, but from honor. And as she walked past it one last time that evening, her fingers brushed the insignia, engraved on the surface, not as a daughter, not as a princess royal, but as a sentinel of something that would never again be spoken aloud. The royal vault remains locked, but the battle for legacy continues. And within Windsor's deepest shadows, the true Queen still reigns. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.